The great station floated in the darkness between stars. It was called Axiom Prime, and it was the largest structure ever built by living hands. Thousands of ships came and went from its docking rings each day. Millions of beings from dozens of worlds walked its corridors. It was the heart of galactic civilization, the place where the rulers of the known universe gathered to decide the fate of lesser species. Today, the rulers had gathered to discuss humanity. High Arbiter Velketh stood at the center of the grand chamber. He was tall and thin, with skin the color of polished copper, and eyes that glowed with a soft blue light. His species, the Dominion, had ruled the Galactic Council for 10,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched young species reach for the stars and then burn themselves to nothing. They knew the patterns of history better than anyone, and they knew a threat when they saw one. "The evidence is clear," Velketh said. His voice echoed through the vast chamber. Around him, representatives from 47 spacefaring civilizations listened in silence. The humans cannot be allowed to continue. On the massive display screens that lined the walls, images of humanity flashed by. Their blue and green homeworld, their primitive rockets, their first stumbling steps into space, and then, the images changed. Warships, colonies, cities rising on distant worlds. The growth was impossible. The speed was unnatural. 200 years ago, we discovered them. Velketh continued. They were nothing. Animals barely capable of escaping their own gravity. We marked them for observation and moved on. We had more important matters to attend to. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. 2 centuries was nothing to species that had walked among the stars for millennia. Humanity had seemed like a curiosity, nothing more, a brief spark that would likely burn itself out. We were wrong. The displays showed humanity's expansion. In the first 50 years, they had colonized their moon and the red planet in their home system. In the next 50, they had reached the outer planets and begun mining the asteroid belts. And then they had found a piece of wreckage from an old war, a crashed ship from a species long forgotten, and everything had changed. They reverse-engineered the drive technology in less than a decade, Velketh said. It took our own ancestors 1,000 years to achieve the same thing. They modified it, improved it, made it faster, and then they spread. The map on the display expanded outward. Red dots appeared one by one, marking human colonies. 17 star systems in less than a century. Each colony grew at an impossible rate. Each one built ships of its own. Each one pushed further into the darkness. Their population has reached 17 billion, the High Arbiter said. Their fleet numbers in the thousands. Their technology advances with each passing year, and they show no respect for the ancient laws of the Council. This was the heart of the matter. The Galactic Council had rules. Species were ranked according to their age and their power. Young species were expected to show respect to their elders. They were expected to follow traditions that had existed for longer than their entire civilizations. They were expected to know their place. Humanity knew nothing of the sort. Their ships crossed into restricted space without permission. Their traders undercut prices that had been fixed for centuries. Their scientists published research that challenged established theories. Their diplomats smiled and nodded, and then did exactly as they pleased. They were chaos wrapped in flesh, and they were growing stronger every day. "I have consulted with the Strategic Council," Velketh said. "I have reviewed the projections. If humanity continues on their current path, they will match our military strength within 50 years. Within 100, they will surpass us. Within 200, he paused. Within 200 years, they will rule this galaxy." The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted at each other. Some demanded immediate action. Others called for more study. A few suggested that perhaps humanity could be reasoned with, brought into the fold, taught to respect the old ways. Velketh let them argue. He had already made his decision. When the noise finally died down, he raised one long-fingered hand. "There is only one solution," he said. "We must remove them before they become too strong to stop." "You speak of war," said a representative from the collective, a species of linked minds that valued peace above all else. "War against a species that has done us no direct harm. Is this just?" "It is necessary," Velketh replied. "And we will not wage war against all of humanity. That would be costly and uncertain. Instead, we will strike at their heart. We will destroy their homeworld." Silence fell over the chamber. Even those who had called for action seemed shocked by the scope of the proposal. Destroying a homeworld was the ultimate punishment, reserved for species that had committed unspeakable crimes. It had not been done in 3,000 years. Earth is more than a planet to the humans, Velketh explained. It is their origin, their sacred ground. Their entire culture is built around it. Every human, no matter how far they travel, dreams of returning there someday. If we destroy Earth, we destroy their spirit. They will fragment. They will fight among themselves. They will fade. And if they do not, asked another representative, what if this only makes them angry? Then we will deal with what remains. But I do not believe it will come to that. Humans are emotional creatures. They form deep attachments to places and things. Take away their anchor, and they will drift. This is the way of young species. We have seen it before. The vote was held. It was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. The Dominion held enough power to force the decision through, and their allies fell in line. By the end of the session, the order had been given. Earth would burn. Fleet Commander Torith received his orders 3 days later. He was a veteran of a dozen campaigns, a soldier who had spent his life enforcing the will of the Council. He had destroyed pirates and rebels. He had crushed uprisings on 100 worlds. He had never failed in his duty. This mission troubled him. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and watched as his fleet assembled. 2,000 warships, drawn from a dozen species, destroyers and cruisers, carriers loaded with attack craft, massive bombardment vessels designed to crack the crust of planets. It was the largest fleet assembled in living memory, all of it aimed at a single world. The humans have done nothing to us, said his second-in-command, a younger officer named Keth. Not directly. Is this truly necessary? Torith did not answer immediately. He stared at the stars, thinking about what he had read in the intelligence reports. The humans were strange. They fought among themselves constantly, divided by borders and beliefs that seemed meaningless to outside observers. They killed each other over resources they could easily share. They poisoned their own world even as they tried to escape it. And yet they also did remarkable things. They created art of stunning beauty. They loved fiercely, sometimes dying for those they cared about. They showed kindness to strangers. They dreamed of futures they would never live to see and worked to build them anyway. They were contradictions, chaos and order, wrapped together in fragile bodies. It is the will of the Council, Torith finally said. That is all that matters. But Commander, enough. Torith's voice was hard. We do not question orders, Keth. We follow them. That is what separates us from chaos. That is what keeps the galaxy stable. Keth fell silent. He was young. He would learn. The fleet entered faster than light travel on the morning of the 4th day. The journey to Earth would take 2 weeks, long enough for Torith to study the reports, to plan the bombardment, to prepare his mind for what he was about to do. He spent the first few days reviewing tactical data. Earth was defended, but not heavily. The humans had a small fleet stationed in their home system, along with orbital platforms and ground-based weapons, nothing that could stand against 2,000 warships. The battle, if there was one, would be over quickly. The rest of the time, Torith found himself reading about humanity itself, their history, their culture, their strange and violent journey from caves to stars. He told himself it was intelligence gathering, a way to understand his enemy, but deep down, he knew it was something else. He was trying to understand what he was about to destroy. The humans had a concept they called home. It was not just a place to live. It was where your family was, where your memories lived, where you felt safe and loved. Every human carried an image of home in their heart, and for most of them, that image looked like Earth. Blue oceans, green forests, cities lit up at night like constellations brought down to the ground. Even the humans who had never set foot on Earth still called it home. Torith wondered what that felt like. His own species did not form such attachments. They were practical creatures, moving from world to world as resources required. A planet was just a planet. Losing one meant nothing. But for humans, losing Earth would mean everything. That was the point, of course. That was why the Council had chosen this target. They wanted to break humanity's spirit. And Earth was the key. Remove the anchor, and the ship drifts away. Simple logic, cold logic. On the 10th day of the journey, Torath received a message from High Arbiter Velketh. It was brief and formal, reminding him of the importance of his mission and the gratitude of the Council. At the end, there was a single sentence that stayed with him. Let there be no survivors to tell tales of resistance. Complete destruction sends the clearest message. Torath read the sentence 3 times. Then he deleted the message and returned to his studies. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human home system. Sensors came online. Tactical displays lit up with data. Officers called out reports from every station, and then the bridge fell silent. Torath stared at his screens. He checked the readings. He ran diagnostic after diagnostic. The equipment was functioning perfectly. The data was accurate. It was impossible. Commander, Keth said, his voice barely a whisper. There is nothing here. The orbital platforms were dark. The defense fleet was gone. The stations that should have been buzzing with activity floated empty. Their lights extinguished. Even the satellites had been removed, leaving the space around Earth as empty as the void between galaxies. Take us in, Torath ordered. Full sensor sweep. Find them. The fleet advanced. Hours passed. They scanned every corner of the system. The moon was empty. The colonies on the red planet were abandoned. The stations around the outer planets were hollow shells, stripped of everything valuable and left to drift. And Earth itself, Torath ordered a shuttle prepared. He had to see it with his own eyes. The descent through the atmosphere was smooth and quiet. No missiles rose to meet them. No fighters scrambled to intercept. The skies were empty except for clouds and birds. Torath stepped out onto the surface of Earth for the first time. He stood in the ruins of what had once been a great city. The buildings were still there, towers of glass and steel reaching toward the gray sky. But no lights burned in their windows. No vehicles moved on the streets. The only sound was the wind, whistling through empty canyons of concrete and metal. He walked through the silence. His guards followed at a distance, their weapons ready, their senses alert. But there was nothing to fight. The city was as dead as a tomb. No, not dead, preserved. Torath entered a building at random. Inside, he found rooms arranged as if their occupants had just stepped out and would return at any moment. Furniture was placed carefully. Books sat on shelves. Pictures hung on walls, images of human families, human celebrations, human lives. But there were no humans. He found the same thing in building after building. Homes waiting for their owners. Offices ready for workers who would never arrive. Schools with empty chairs and silent hallways. Hospitals with beds made and equipment standing ready. Everything was neat. Everything was clean. Everything was intentionally left behind. Commander, one of his officers called over the communication link. You need to see this. Torath followed the signal to the outskirts of the city. There, beyond the buildings and the roads, he found something that stopped him in his tracks. Graves. Rows upon rows of white markers stretching to the horizon. Each one bore a name. Each one marked a life that had ended. They were arranged with perfect precision, like soldiers standing at attention for all eternity. There are billions of them, the officer said, across the entire planet, every continent, every nation. They buried everyone who ever died here. Everyone. Torath walked among the graves. He read the names without understanding them. He saw the dates, some ancient, some recent. He saw the small offerings left beside some markers. Flowers made of metal that would never decay. Small tokens that meant nothing to him but had clearly meant everything to someone. This was not a defeat. This was not a disaster. This was a goodbye. The humans had left. All of them. They had taken their living with them and left only their dead behind. Earth was not a homeworld anymore. It was a cemetery, a memorial, a monument to everything humanity had been. And Torath had brought 2,000 warships to destroy it. He stood among the graves as the sun began to set. The sky turned orange and pink, painting the clouds with colors he had never seen on any other world. It was beautiful, he realized. This planet, this tiny blue dot in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, was beautiful, and humanity had loved it. Loved it enough to leave it exactly as it was, preserved forever, rather than watch it burn. Commander, Keth's voice came through the communication link. What are your orders? Torath looked at the graves. He thought about the empty cities and the silent streets. He thought about 17 billion humans who had simply vanished, gone somewhere else, somewhere the Council's fleet could not follow. He thought about the message this sent, You came to hurt us. You came to break us. And we were already gone. Begin a full investigation, Toreth said. Search everything. Find out where they went and how long ago they left. And send a message to the High Arbiter. What should the message say, Commander? Toreth looked up at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, humanity was watching. He was certain of it. They had planned this too carefully to miss the moment. Tell him we came too late, Toreth said quietly. The humans are gone. And they left us nothing but graves. The first stars appeared above the horizon. Somewhere among them, humanity was waiting. And for the first time in his long career, Fleet Commander Toreth did not know what to do next. The morning came slowly over the abandoned city. Toreth had not slept. He had spent the night walking through empty streets, trying to understand what he was seeing, trying to find some clue, some hint, some explanation for how 17 billion humans had simply disappeared. His officers reported in throughout the night. The story was the same everywhere. Empty cities, silent towns, farms with no farmers, factories with no workers, roads that led from nowhere to nowhere, connecting places that no longer held life. And everywhere, the graves. They spread across every continent. Some were ancient, their markers worn by centuries of wind and rain. Others were so new that the dirt around them had barely settled. But all of them were marked, all of them were named, all of them were cared for. This was not the work of a desperate escape. This was not a panicked retreat. This was something planned over years, maybe decades. The humans had known the attack was coming, and instead of fighting or begging or hiding, they had simply left. They had left, and they had taken everyone with them. Toreth stood on a hill overlooking one of the larger grave fields. His second-in-command, Keth, stood beside him, holding a data tablet that glowed faintly in the morning light. The analysis is complete, Keth said. The most recent graves are approximately 30 years old. That matches with the last known human activity on Earth. 30 years, Toreth repeated. They began leaving 30 years ago. It appears so, Commander. The evacuation was gradual, organized. They moved entire populations off-world in waves, always quietly, always carefully. We never detected anything unusual because they never did anything unusual. They simply left. Toreth thought about that. 30 years of planning. 30 years of moving people and supplies and equipment. 30 years of keeping a secret from the entire galaxy. It was impossible. It should have been impossible. How did they hide it? He asked. We had surveillance on their home system. We had agents in their colonies. How did 17 billion people disappear without anyone noticing? Keth pulled up data on his tablet. They didn't hide all of it. They hid the destination. The outer colonies continued to operate normally. Trade continued. Communications continued. Everything looked the same on the surface, but underneath, they were slowly emptying their worlds. And the colonists we observed? Holograms, automated systems, remote-controlled machines designed to mimic human activity. The humans who remained were just maintainers, keeping up the appearance until the last moment. Then they left too. Toreth felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt afraid, not of the humans themselves, but of what they represented. A species that could plan 30 years ahead. A species that could keep a secret among billions of individuals. A species that could face extinction and respond with quiet, patient, perfect organization. This was not the behavior of animals. This was not the behavior of a young species fumbling in the dark. This was something else entirely. What did they leave behind? Toreth asked. Besides the graves, everything, Keth said. Libraries, museums, archives. They preserved their entire history and left it for anyone to find. It's as if they wanted us to understand who they were. Toreth considered this. Show me. They traveled to a structure the humans had called a museum. It was a massive building near the center of the dead city, its walls made of white stone that gleamed in the sunlight. The doors stood open, welcoming visitors who would never come. Inside, Toreth found humanity laid bare. The first room contained artifacts from humanity's earliest days. Stone tools shaped by ancient hands. Bones of animals that had been extinct for millions of years. Cave paintings preserved behind glass, showing simple figures hunting and dancing and reaching toward the sky. Even then, Toreth realized, even when they were barely more than animals themselves, humans had looked upward. They had wondered about the stars, The next room showed their first civilizations. Golden masks from desert kingdoms, clay tablets covered in angular writing, statues of gods and monsters and heroes, weapons of bronze and iron, jewelry made of precious stones. The humans had built empires and watched them fall, over and over again, each one leaving behind fragments of beauty and violence. Room after room, century after century, the story continued. Wars and discoveries, plagues and renaissances, art that made Toreth stop and stare, even though he did not understand the emotions behind it, music that played softly from hidden speakers, melodies that seemed to carry weight and meaning beyond their simple notes, and through it all, the same themes repeated. Humans fighting each other, humans loving each other, humans destroying and creating, killing and healing, falling and rising. They were chaos, just as the Council had said, but there was something else too. Something that the Council had not seen. There was persistence. Every time humanity fell, they got back up. Every time they faced disaster, they found a way through. They burned their forests and then planted new ones. They poisoned their oceans and then cleaned them. They split the atom and nearly destroyed themselves. And then they learned to use that power to reach the stars. They were not chaos. They were adaptation. They were survival made flesh. At the end of the museum, Toreth found a single room with no artifacts. The walls were blank, except for a single message, written in the common trading language of the galaxy. We were here, it said. We loved. We fought. We dreamed. We made mistakes that cost millions of lives. We created beauty that will last forever. We were not perfect. We were not even close. But we tried. We always tried. And when it was time to go, we did not forget. We took everything that mattered with us. We left everything that others might want to remember. This is who we were. This is what we leave behind. Thank you for visiting. Toreth stood before the message for a long time. He thought about the orders in his pocket. Complete destruction. No survivors. Clear message. What message could he possibly send now? He left the museum and walked through the city. His guards followed at a distance, still alert, still ready for threats that would never come. The streets were perfectly maintained. The buildings showed no signs of damage or decay. The humans had cared for this place until the very last moment. In the center of the city, Toreth found a statue. It showed a group of humans, men, women, children standing together and looking upward. Their arms were raised. Their faces were filled with hope. Above them, carved into the stone, were words in a language Toreth did not recognize. He activated his translator. The words reformed in his mind. Per aspera ad astra, through hardship to the stars. Toreth looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of his fleet, humanity was building something new. They had left their homeworld behind, not because they did not love it, but because they loved something else more. They had looked at the stars and decided that no planet, no matter how beautiful, was worth dying for. They had chosen to live, and in doing so, they had made the Council's attack meaningless. They had turned the greatest military operation in galactic history into a joke. 2,000 warships, enough firepower to crack continents, sent to destroy a graveyard. Toreth began to laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who has just realized that everything he thought he knew was wrong. Keth approached carefully. Commander, are you well? No, Toreth said. No, I am not well, but I am beginning to understand. He turned away from the statue and began walking toward the shuttle. There was more to find. There had to be more. The humans would not have left without leaving some kind of final message, some explanation for why they had done this and where they had gone. The search continued for days. Teams spread across the planet, exploring cities and towns and villages. They found the same things everywhere. Preserved homes, maintained infrastructure, careful archives of everything humanity had ever created, and always, the graves. They found libraries filled with books, physical books, made of paper and ink, preserved behind protective glass. They found digital archives containing every piece of music, every film, every photograph ever created. They found scientific databases with research that would take decades to fully analyze. They found art in every form, paintings and sculptures and tapestries and buildings that were works of art in themselves. And they found messages, not hidden messages, not secret communications, just messages, notes left in obvious places, written in the trading language so that anyone could read them. They were addressed to whoever came after. The kitchen is fully stocked. Help yourself. The garden in the back needs water every 3 days. The flowers are called roses. They smell wonderful. This was my grandmother's house. She loved it here. Please treat it kindly. If you find this note, I hope you are well. I hope you come in peace. I hope we can be friends someday. Toreth collected dozens of these messages. Hundreds. He read them late at night in his quarters aboard the flagship, trying to understand the minds that had written them. The humans had known that enemies might come. They had known that their world might be destroyed. And yet they had left notes of welcome, notes of hope, notes that assumed the best about whoever might follow. Were they naive? Were they foolish? Or were they something else entirely? On the 7th day, one of the search teams found something different. A sealed chamber beneath the ruins of a city called Geneva. The entrance was hidden, but not locked. Someone wanted it to be found, but only by those who looked carefully. Toreth traveled to the site immediately. The chamber was deep underground, accessible through a long tunnel that had been carved through solid rock. At the end of the tunnel was a single door, marked with a symbol that Toreth did not recognize, a circle containing a simple image of a planet and a star. The door opened at his approach. Inside, the chamber was small and empty, except for a single pedestal. On the pedestal sat a device, a holographic projector, ancient by galactic standards, but perfectly maintained. Toreth approached the pedestal. The device activated. Light filled the chamber. A figure appeared, a human woman, old and silver-haired, wearing a simple uniform with no markings or decorations. She looked directly at Toreth, as if she could see him, though he knew she was only a recording. "Hello," the woman said. Her voice was warm and calm. "If you are seeing this, then you have come to Earth. Perhaps you came as friends, hoping to trade or learn or explore. If so, welcome. We are sorry we could not be here to greet you in person." She paused. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes grew harder. "Or perhaps you came for another reason. Perhaps you came to destroy us, to burn our world and scatter our ashes across the void. Perhaps you are the Galactic Council, finally acting on the verdict we knew was coming. If so, I have a message for you." Toreth held his breath. "We do not hate you." The words hung in the air. Toreth waited for more, for anger, for threats, for promises of revenge. But the woman simply smiled. "We know what you planned. We have known for 30 years. Your surveillance probes are not as subtle as you believe. And we have had a long time to learn your methods. We intercepted your communications. We read your intelligence reports. We watched your debates and your votes and your preparations. We knew the attack was coming." She spread her hands, gesturing at the empty chamber around her. "And so we left. My name is Yuna Okonkwo. I was the director of the Final Preservation Project, and I am one of the last humans to leave Earth. By the time you see this recording, I will be very far away. All of us will be. You will not find us." She stepped forward, and the hologram seemed to grow larger, more immediate, more real. "We did not run because we were afraid. We ran because we made a choice. Earth is beautiful. Earth is sacred. Earth is the place where our species was born, and where billions of our ancestors lived and died. We love it more than you can possibly understand." Her voice cracked slightly. Toreth saw moisture in her eyes. "But Earth is also just a planet. It is rock, and water, and air. It can be destroyed. It can be taken from us. And we decided long ago that we would not let our survival depend on any single place, no matter how beloved." She wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "Home is not a planet. Home is wherever we carry each other, and we carry each other everywhere." Toreth stood in silence as the recording continued. "We have left Earth exactly as it was. We have preserved everything we could. We have buried our dead and marked their graves. We have left our history for anyone who wants to learn from it. Consider this our gift to the galaxy. You came here to break our spirit. You thought that if you destroyed our origin, we would fragment and fade. You were wrong. Our spirit is not in the soil beneath your feet. It is in us. It is in every human, wherever they go, for as long as they live." The hologram began to fade. "We bear you no ill will, counselors. Fear is the universe's oldest instinct, and we understand why you fear us. We are strange. We are unpredictable. We grow too fast and change too quickly. We do not fit into your categories or follow your rules. But we are not your enemies. We never were. And perhaps, someday, we can be your friends. The figure of Yuna Okonkwo looked directly at Toreth one last time. When you are ready to speak as equals, you will know where to find us. Until then, take care of our planet. It meant everything to us. The hologram vanished. The chamber fell dark, and Fleet Commander Toreth stood alone in the silence, holding a message he had no idea how to deliver. The humans were gone. They had left behind a graveyard and a museum and a challenge, and somewhere among the stars, they were waiting to see what the galaxy would do next. The message from Fleet Commander Toreth arrived at Axiom Prime 3 days after the fleet reached Earth. High Arbiter Velketh read it alone in his private chambers, his copper-colored face growing darker with each word. The humans were gone. All 17 billion of them. Earth was empty. The colonies were empty. The entire species had vanished, leaving behind nothing but graves and memories, and a recorded message from someone called Yuna Okonkwo. Velketh watched the recording 5 times. Each time, the human woman's words struck deeper. We do not hate you. We knew you were coming. We left anyway. When you are ready to speak as equals, you will know where to find us. Equals. The word burned in his mind. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions and absorbed empires. They had watched young species rise and fall like waves against a shore. They were the oldest, the wisest, the most powerful civilization in known space, and a species that had been crawling in caves just 2 centuries ago had made them look like fools. Velketh called an emergency session of the Grand Chamber. The representatives gathered quickly, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. Rumors had already begun to spread. The attack fleet had arrived at Earth to find nothing. The humans had somehow escaped. The greatest military operation in galactic history had failed. When the doors closed and the chamber fell silent, Velketh played Toreth's report for everyone to see. The reaction was exactly what he expected. Shock, confusion, denial. Some representatives refused to believe what they were seeing. Others demanded explanations. A few simply sat in stunned silence, watching the holographic images of empty cities and endless graves. And then came the recording from Yuna Okonkwo. When it ended, the chamber erupted. "This is a trick," shouted Ambassador Corell of the mining guilds. "The humans are hiding somewhere on the planet. They must be. No species can move 17 billion individuals without leaving a trace." "The traces are there," Velketh replied coldly. "Commander Toreth's teams found them. The humans spent 30 years preparing this evacuation. They moved their population in waves, replacing living beings with holograms and automated systems. By the time we arrived, there was no one left to kill." "Then where did they go?" demanded another representative. "They must be somewhere. Space is vast, but it is not infinite. We will find them, will we?" Velketh asked. "We had surveillance on their home system for 2 centuries. We had agents in their colonies. We watched their ships and monitored their communications, and yet we detected nothing. Not a whisper, not a hint. They fooled us completely." The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence. "The humans knew we were coming," Velketh continued. "They knew our plans better than we did. They read our intelligence reports. They listened to our debates. They watched us vote on their destruction, and they responded not with weapons, but with patience. 30 years of patience. 30 years of planning. 30 years of perfect secrecy." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who suddenly seemed very small. "We thought we were hunting animals. We were wrong." The debates continued for hours. Strategies were proposed and rejected. Search patterns were suggested and analyzed. Some representatives called for an expanded hunt, spreading the fleet across the galaxy to find where humanity had gone. Others argued for a defensive posture, pulling back to protect core worlds in case the humans returned with weapons of their own. But underneath all the tactical discussions, a deeper question remained unanswered. What did this mean? The humans had not fought back. They had not threatened revenge. They had simply left, and in leaving, they had exposed the Council for what it truly was. Bullies, cowards, creatures so afraid of change that they would destroy an entire civilization rather than share the galaxy with it. Ambassador Kethra of the Synthesis, a young diplomat from a minor species that had only recently joined the Council, stood and asked the question that no one wanted to hear. "Why did we attack them in the first place?" Velketh turned to face her. "Because they were a threat." "Were they?" Kethra asked. "They had done nothing to us. They traded fairly. They honored their agreements. They never attacked a council world or harmed a council citizen. The only threat they posed was the threat of competition, the threat that someday they might become as powerful as we are. That is precisely the point, Velketh replied. A species that powerful would challenge our authority. They would disrupt the order we have maintained for 10,000 years. And is that order worth preserving? Kethra asked quietly. An order built on fear? An order that destroys anyone who might one day become an equal? The chamber fell silent. Velketh's eyes glowed brighter, a sign of barely controlled anger. You speak dangerous words, Ambassador. I speak the truth, and I think everyone in this chamber knows it. She turned to address the other representatives, her voice growing stronger. We came here today expecting to celebrate a victory. Instead, we found a mirror. The humans held it up for us to see, and we do not like what we see. They could have fought. They could have raged. They could have used whatever technology they developed to strike back at us. Instead, they chose to leave. They chose to spare us. And they left a message saying, they do not hate us. She paused, letting the words sink in. What kind of species does that? What kind of species responds to a death sentence with forgiveness? Velketh moved to interrupt, but other voices rose to support Kethra. The collective, the species of linked minds, spoke through their representative. She raises valid concerns. The human response was not what we predicted. Perhaps our predictions were wrong in other ways as well. We have underestimated them from the beginning, said another representative, from a species of traders who had dealt with humans for decades. They are not animals. They are not chaos. They are something new, something we have never seen before. The debates continued for days. Factions formed and dissolved. Alliances shifted. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion's absolute control of the Council began to crack, and while the politicians argued, the scientists worked. Teams of researchers descended on Earth to study everything humanity had left behind. They cataloged artifacts and analyzed archives. They read human literature and listened to human music. They tried to understand the species that had built this world and then chosen to abandon it. What they found changed everything. The humans had not just left their history behind, they had left their technology. In carefully marked facilities across the planet, humanity had stored designs and blueprints for devices that made Council technology look primitive. Faster than light drives that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of months. Energy sources that could power entire civilizations without fuel. Medical treatments that could extend lifespans by centuries. And weapons, not actual weapons. The humans had not left any devices capable of causing harm, but they had left designs, theoretical frameworks, mathematical models, plans for weapons that could shatter stars, collapse dimensions, tear holes in the fabric of space itself. The implications were terrifying. Humanity had not run from the Council because they were weak. They had run because fighting would have been too easy. They could have destroyed the invasion fleet before it even arrived. They could have turned the Council's own stations into debris. They could have waged a war that would have ended with the galaxy in ruins. Instead, they had chosen to leave. They were trying to tell us something, said Dr. Velis, the lead researcher on the technology analysis team. She stood before the Council, presenting her findings with trembling hands. All of this was deliberate. The archives, the designs, the message. They wanted us to understand what they were capable of. And then they wanted us to understand that they chose not to use it. Why? Velketh demanded. What possible reason could they have for showing restraint? Dr. Velis pulled up a passage from the human archives. It was from an ancient text, written thousands of years before humanity had even dreamed of spaceflight. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, she read. The humans did not want revenge. They did not want to become what they believed we were. They wanted something else entirely. And what is that? Dr. Velis looked at the High Arbiter with something like pity. They wanted us to grow up. The words hit the chamber like a physical blow. Velketh stood rigid, his eyes blazing. Around him, representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They left us their technology as a gift. Dr. Velis continued. Not as a weapon or a threat, but as proof of what is possible. They showed us that advancement does not require conquest. Progress does not require violence. They built these things while running for their lives, while preparing to abandon everything they loved, and they still chose to share them freely. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I have studied many species in my career. I have never seen anything like this. The humans are not our enemies. They are our teachers, and we almost killed them because we were too afraid to learn. The session ended without resolution. Velketh retreated to his chambers, refusing to speak with anyone. The other representatives scattered to their own ships and stations, each carrying their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. Ambassador Kethra returned to her quarters and sat in silence for a long time. She thought about the human woman in the recording, old and tired and standing alone in an empty chamber, delivering a message of peace to enemies who had come to destroy her entire species. What courage that must have taken. What faith in the possibility of a better future. Kethra pulled up the coordinates that had been included at the end of the recording. A location beyond the galactic rim, far from any known trade routes or settlements. A relay beacon, waiting for someone brave enough to send a signal. She did not activate the beacon. Not yet. The galaxy was not ready. The council was not ready. Too much fear still clouded too many minds. But someday, she thought, someday, someone would be ready. Someone would look at those coordinates and decide that the humans had been right. That speaking as equals was better than killing as tyrants. That the galaxy could change. She saved the coordinates and promised herself that she would not forget them. Meanwhile, on Earth, the empty cities stood silent under the stars. The graves kept their patient watch. The museums waited for visitors who might never come. And somewhere beyond the rim of the galaxy, humanity continued to wait. They had thrown a stone into a still pond. Now they watched the ripples spread, wondering if the water would ever settle into something new. It was a long game they were playing. A game that might take centuries or millennia to finish. But they were patient. They had learned patience from their own history, from all the times they had fallen and risen and fallen again. They could wait a little longer. After all, they had left a light on. Sooner or later, someone would come looking for it. And when they did, humanity would be ready to welcome them home, not to Earth. Earth was just a memory now. A beautiful dream preserved in stone and soil. Home was ahead. Home was always ahead, and there was room for everyone who wanted to find it. 50 years passed like slow water wearing away stone. High Arbiter Velketh died in the 3rd year after the failed invasion. Some said he died of shame. Others said the stress of what had happened had simply been too much for his ancient body. Whatever the cause, his death marked the end of an era. The Dominion, already weakened by the embarrassment at Earth, began to lose its iron grip on the Galactic Council. New voices rose to fill the silence. Ambassador Kethra, the young diplomat who had dared to question the invasion, became a leader in her own right. Her words about mirrors and fear had spread across the galaxy, repeated in council chambers and trading posts and quiet conversations between beings who had never questioned the old order before. She did not seek power for its own sake. She sought change, and slowly, painfully, change began to come. The first reform came 5 years after the invasion. The council voted to end the cleansing protocols, the ancient laws that allowed the destruction of entire species deemed threatening to galactic stability. The vote was close, but it passed. For the first time in 3,000 years, no species in the galaxy faced extinction simply for existing. The second reform came a decade later. New species would no longer be forced into centuries of servitude before being granted full membership in the council. Instead, they would be welcomed as partners, given access to technology and trade and knowledge. The old hierarchy, built on age and power and fear, began to crumble. And always, in the background, the shadow of humanity lingered. The technology they had left behind changed everything. The new drive systems allowed ships to cross the galaxy in weeks instead of months. Trade routes that had been impossible suddenly became practical. Species that had never met began to exchange ideas and culture and hope. The galaxy grew smaller, and in growing smaller, it grew richer. The medical advances were even more profound. Diseases that had plagued dozens of worlds for millennia were cured within years. Lifespans extended, suffering diminished. Beings who had expected to die in pain instead lived to see their grandchildren's grandchildren. All of it came from humanity. All of it was freely given, and all of it served as a constant reminder of what the Council had tried to do. Dr. Velis, the scientist who had first analyzed the human archives, dedicated her remaining years to studying everything humanity had left behind. She traveled across Earth, cataloging artifacts and reading texts, and trying to understand the minds that had created such wonders. Near the end of her life, She published a book that became required reading across the galaxy. She called it The Human Question. In it, she argued that humanity represented something entirely new in galactic history. They were not simply another species climbing the ladder of advancement. They were a different kind of being entirely, shaped by a world that had forced them to adapt or die, again and again, until adaptation became their defining trait. They changed. That was their gift. That was their curse. That was what made them so dangerous and so wonderful. The Dominion had seen only the danger. They had looked at humanity's rapid growth and seen a threat to be eliminated, but Velis argued that they had missed the larger picture. Humanity's ability to change was not a weapon pointed at the galaxy. It was an invitation. Change with us, they seemed to say. Grow with us. Become something new. The Council had responded with fear. Humanity had responded with patience. And now, 50 years later, the galaxy was finally beginning to understand what they had been offered. Kethra read Velis's book in a single night. When she finished, she sat in her quarters and wept. Not from sadness, but from something she could not quite name. Relief, perhaps, or hope, or the simple recognition that the universe was larger and stranger and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. She was old now. Her species did not live as long as the Dominion, and the decades had taken their toll. But she had one task left to complete before she died. The coordinates. She had carried them for 50 years, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the galaxy to be ready. Now, at last, she believed that moment had come. She traveled to Earth. The planet had become something of a pilgrimage site in the decades since the invasion. Beings from across the galaxy came to walk through the empty cities, to read the messages left behind, to stand among the graves and try to understand what had happened here. The museums were always crowded. The archives were accessed constantly. Earth had become, in death, what it could never have been in life, a symbol of hope for the entire galaxy. Kethra walked alone through the streets of the city where Yuna Okonkwo had left her final message. The chamber beneath Geneva was still there, preserved exactly as Toreth had found it. The holographic projector still worked. The recording still played. She watched it one more time. The old human woman, standing in the darkness, speaking words of peace to enemies who had come to destroy everything she loved. When you are ready to speak as equals, you will know where to find us. Kethra had been waiting 50 years to answer that call. She traveled alone. Her ship was small, barely larger than a shuttle, carrying no weapons and no escort. The journey beyond the galactic rim took months. She had time to think, to prepare, to wonder what she would find at the end. The coordinates led to empty space, nothing but darkness and distant stars. For a moment, Kethra feared that she had come too late, that the beacon had been removed, that humanity had moved on without ever receiving an answer. Then the beacon activated. It was small, barely visible against the blackness, a tiny light pulsing in the void, waiting for someone to notice. Kethra brought her ship alongside it and activated her communication systems. "This is Ambassador Kethra of the Galactic Council," she said. "I come in peace. I come to speak as an equal." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a voice answered. It was human, warm and patient, as if it had been waiting for this call for a very long time. "Hello, Ambassador. We've been hoping someone would come. Please follow the signal. We have much to discuss." A new set of coordinates appeared on her screen, leading deeper into the darkness beyond the rim. Kethra did not hesitate. She had not come this far to turn back now. The journey took another week. Each day, the space around her grew stranger. She passed through regions where the stars seemed to bend and twist, where the laws of physics operated differently than they did in the galaxy she had left behind. The humans had not just run to the edge of known space, they had run beyond it, into territories that the Council had never mapped. What she found at the end of the journey took her breath away. They had built something, not a city or a station or a colony. Something larger, something stranger, something that stretched across light years, a web of habitats and structures connected by threads of light that pulsed like the nervous system of some vast living creature. It was beautiful and terrifying, technology so far beyond anything the Council possessed that Kethra could barely comprehend what she was seeing. A voice spoke through her communication systems. "Welcome to the Edge, Ambassador. Please, dock at the coordinates we're sending. There are people who have been waiting a very long time to meet you." Kethra docked her ship in a bay that seemed designed specifically for her vessel, as if they had known exactly what she would be flying. She stepped out onto a platform that overlooked a vast chamber filled with light and movement, and beings of every description. Humans. Thousands of them. Perhaps millions. Moving and working and living, just as they had on Earth, but somehow different. They carried themselves with a calm confidence that she had never seen before. They smiled at her as she passed, nodding and greeting, as if visitors from the Galactic Council arrived every day. She was led through corridors and chambers, past laboratories and gardens and spaces she could not begin to understand. Finally, she arrived at a simple room with a simple table and 2 simple chairs. A human was waiting for her. He was old, perhaps the oldest human she had ever seen, with white hair and deep lines carved into his face by centuries of life, but his eyes were young, bright with intelligence and something that might have been amusement. "Ambassador Kethra," he said. "Thank you for coming. My name is Marcus. I was just a child when we left Earth. I've spent my whole life wondering if anyone would ever come looking for us." Kethra sat down across from him. Her hands were trembling, though she could not have said why. "You built all of this," she said. "In 50 years. How is that possible?" Marcus smiled. "It wasn't 50 years for us, Ambassador. Time works differently out here. We've had much longer to prepare." He leaned back in his chair and looked at her with those young old eyes. "We knew someone would come eventually. We hoped it would be someone like you. Someone who asked questions instead of giving orders. Someone who looked at the galaxy and saw something that could be better." Kethra thought about all the years she had spent fighting for change, all the debates and compromises and small victories that had slowly, painfully, moved the Council towards something resembling decency. "It was not easy," she said. "There are still those who fear you, who believe you are waiting out here to conquer us." "And what do you believe, Ambassador?" She looked around the room. It was simple, undecorated, almost humble. Nothing about it spoke of conquest or domination. It spoke of patience, of hope, of a species that had chosen to wait rather than destroy. "I believe you are exactly what you said you were," Kethra replied. "I believe you want to be friends." Marcus's smile widened. "Then you understand more than most. But friendship requires something, Ambassador. It requires trust. It requires vulnerability. It requires both sides to take risks." He reached across the table and took her hands in his. His grip was gentle, warm, utterly human. "We've been building something out here. A new way of living. A new way of thinking about what civilization can be. It's not perfect, and it never will be. But it's different from what came before. And we believe it's better." He looked into her eyes. "We want to share it. Not as conquerors. Not as teachers. As partners. We want to work together with the species of the galaxy to build something that none of us could build alone. Something that will last. Something that will grow. Something that will be worthy of all the lives that were lost along the way." Kethra felt tears forming in her eyes. She had come all this way expecting to find answers. Instead, she had found questions. Better questions. Questions worth spending a lifetime trying to answer. "How do we begin?" she asked. Marcus squeezed her hands gently. "We already have, Ambassador. This conversation right here, right now, is the beginning. Everything that follows will grow from this moment. It will take time. It will take effort. There will be setbacks and failures and moments when it seems impossible. But if we keep talking, keep trying, keep believing that something better is possible, we'll get there eventually." He stood and walked to a window that looked out over the vast structure humanity had built. "We left Earth because we had to. Because staying would have meant war, and war would have meant destruction for everyone. But we never stopped thinking about the galaxy we left behind. We never stopped hoping that someday we could come back." He turned to face her. "Not to conquer, not to rule, just to help. Just to be part of something larger than ourselves." Kethra joined him at the window. Below them, the lights of humanity's new civilization pulsed and flowed like a living thing. "The galaxy is not ready for this," she said. "Many will be afraid. Many will resist." "We know," Marcus replied. "That's why we're not asking the galaxy to come to us. We're asking if we can come to the galaxy. Slowly, carefully, one friendship at a time." He put his hand on her shoulder. "You are the first, Ambassador. The first friend we've made in 50 years. But you won't be the last. We've waited this long. We can wait a little longer." Kethra looked out at the stars beyond the window. Somewhere behind her, billions of light years away, Earth still turned in its orbit, keeping watch over the graves of all the humans who had ever lived and died there. And somewhere ahead, in the darkness between the stars, a new future was waiting to be born. She did not know what that future would look like. No one did. But for the first time in her long life, Kethra believed that it would be good. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The years that followed Ambassador Kethra's journey became known as the time of opening. It was not a sudden change, not a revolution that swept across the galaxy in fire and fury. It was something slower, quieter, and far more powerful. It was the steady work of beings who had chosen hope over fear. Kethra returned from the edge with a proposal. Humanity would send small delegations to any world that invited them. They would share technology freely. They would teach and learn in equal measure. They would ask nothing in return except the chance to prove that they meant no harm. The council debated for months. Old fears rose again, warnings from those who still believed humanity was a threat. But the tide had turned. Too many species had benefited from the gifts humanity left on Earth. Too many minds had been opened by the changes of the past 50 years. The proposal passed by the largest margin in council history. The first human delegation arrived at Axiom Prime on a clear morning in the Galactic Standard Calendar. Their ship was small and unarmed, carrying only a dozen individuals. They docked without ceremony and walked into the great station as if they had been doing it their whole lives. The crowds that gathered to see them were vast. Beings from dozens of species pressed against the barriers, straining to catch a glimpse of the creatures who had become legend. Some were curious. Some were afraid. Some simply wanted to see if the stories were true. The humans smiled and waved. They stopped to talk with anyone who approached. They answered questions with patience and humor. They did not act like conquerors or saviors. They acted like neighbors who had been away for a long time and were happy to be back. At the head of the delegation was a woman named Yuna. She was young, barely 50 years old, but she carried herself with the calm confidence that seemed to mark all humans. She was the granddaughter of the woman who had recorded the message in the chamber beneath Geneva. Her grandmother had died decades ago, but Yuna had grown up listening to stories about Earth, about the Exodus, about the hope that someday humanity would return to the stars they had left behind. She stood before the grand chamber of the Galactic Council and spoke words that would be remembered for centuries. "We do not come as rulers," she said. "We do not come as teachers or judges or guides. We come as partners. We come as friends. We come because we believe that the galaxy is big enough for all of us, and that together, we can build something greater than any of us could build alone." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings from 100 different worlds. 50 years ago, your predecessors voted to destroy us. We do not hold that against you. Fear is a powerful thing. It makes us do terrible things. We know this because we have done terrible things ourselves. Our history is full of violence and hatred and cruelty. We are not perfect. We have never claimed to be. She paused, letting the silence stretch. But we have also done wonderful things. We have loved and created and dreamed. We have reached for the stars even when the odds were against us. We have fallen and risen, again and again, because that is what we do. That is who we are. We survive. We adapt. We grow. She spread her hands, a gesture of openness and invitation. We want to share that gift with you. Not to make you like us, but to learn from you as much as you learn from us. We believe that the future should be written by all of us together. We believe that the best is yet to come. She smiled, and there was something in that smile that reminded the oldest members of the council of the recording they had seen so long ago. The same warmth, the same patience, the same unshakable hope. So let us begin. Let us talk. Let us work. Let us build something that our grandchildren's grandchildren will be proud of. Let us prove that fear was wrong and hope was right. The chamber erupted in applause. It was not unanimous. Some representatives sat in stony silence, but it was overwhelming. The sound echoed off the ancient walls, filling the space with something that had been absent for too long: joy. In the years that followed, humanity spread slowly back into the galaxy they had left behind. They did not come with fleets or armies. They came with ships full of engineers and doctors and teachers. They helped build hospitals on worlds that had never known medicine. They shared technologies that solved problems that had plagued civilizations for millennia. They sat down with former enemies and talked, for hours and days and years, until understanding began to grow. It was not always easy. There were conflicts and misunderstandings. Some species refused to accept humanity's presence, clinging to old fears. Some humans lost patience with the slow pace of change, wanting to push faster than the galaxy was ready to move. Mistakes were made on both sides, but the work continued. Day after day, year after year, the bonds grew stronger. Trade routes expanded. Cultural exchanges flourished. Beings who had never met began to see each other as family. The galaxy, which had been divided for so long, slowly began to heal, and at the center of it all stood Earth. The planet had become the most visited world in the galaxy. Pilgrims came from every corner of known space to walk among the graves, to read the messages left behind, to stand in the museums and try to understand the species that had built them. It was no longer just a human memorial. It was a memorial for everyone who had ever suffered because of fear and hatred. A reminder of what could be lost and what could be saved. The humans maintained the planet with loving care. They tended the graves and preserved the cities and kept the lights burning in the museums. They welcomed every visitor and answered every question. And sometimes, late at night, when the crowds had gone and the stars shone bright overhead, they would gather in the old cities and tell stories about the world that had once been their home. 100 years after the failed invasion, a ceremony was held on Earth. Representatives from every species in the Galactic Council gathered in the city that had once been called Geneva. They came to mark an anniversary, but also to celebrate something larger. The galaxy had changed. The old order had fallen. Something new had risen in its place. Ambassador Yellen stood at the center of the gathering. She was the granddaughter of Ambassador Kethra, the woman who had first journeyed to the edge and returned with hope. Like her grandmother, she had dedicated her life to building bridges between species. Like her grandmother, she believed that the best was yet to come. Beside her stood a human named Marcus. He was impossibly old, over 200 years by the standard calendar, kept alive by the medical technologies his species had developed during their long exile. He had been the first human to welcome Kethra to the edge, and he had watched with quiet satisfaction as everything they had dreamed of slowly came true. 100 years ago, Yellen said, a fleet came to this world to destroy it. They found nothing but graves and memories and a message of hope. That message changed everything. It changed us. It showed us that there was another way to live, another way to think about what civilization could be. She gestured to the crowd around her, beings of every shape and size and color, standing together under the same sky. Look at what we have built. Look at what we have become. This is not the work of any single species. This is the work of all of us, together. This is proof that hope was right and fear was wrong. Marcus stepped forward. His voice was soft, but it carried across the gathering. When we left Earth, we did not know if we would ever return. We did not know if anyone would come looking for us. We only knew that we had to try something different. We had to believe that the galaxy could change. He looked at the graves, stretching into the distance, the endless rows of white markers that held the remains of everyone who had ever called this world home. We left our dead here because we wanted to remember where we came from. But we took our hope with us. And now, after all these years, we have brought it back. He turned to face the crowd. This is not the end of the story. This is not even the middle. This is just the beginning. We have so much work still to do, so many wounds still to heal, so many bridges still to build, but I believe, with all my heart, that we will do it. I believe that our grandchildren's grandchildren will look back at this moment and know that this was when everything changed. He smiled, and it was the same smile that had greeted Kethra so many years ago. Warm and patient and full of hope. Welcome home, he said. All of you. Welcome home. The applause that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard. It rolled across the empty cities like thunder. It echoed off the walls of the museums. It rose toward the stars, carrying with it the voices of 1,000 species united in a single moment of joy. And somewhere above, in the darkness between the worlds, the future waited, not as a threat, not as a promise, just as a possibility, vast and unknown and beautiful. It would not be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. There would be setbacks and failures. There would be moments when it seemed like the old fears were returning, when the darkness threatened to swallow the light. But the light would endure. It had endured the long exile. It had endured the decades of waiting. It would endure whatever came next, because that was what hope did. It endured. It adapted. It survived. Just like humanity. Just like the galaxy. Just like everything that chose to believe in something better. The ceremony ended as the sun set over Earth. The visitors departed, returning to their ships and their worlds and their lives. But something had changed in each of them. A small seed had been planted, a tiny light that would grow and spread and illuminate the darkness. Marcus stood alone among the graves as the last shuttle rose into the sky. He was tired. More tired than he had ever been. 2 centuries of life had taken their toll. But he was also at peace. He had seen the impossible become possible. He had watched fear give way to hope. He had lived long enough to know that the story had a good ending, or at least a good beginning to the next chapter. He looked up at the stars and smiled. "We did it, grandmother," he whispered. "We actually did it." The wind carried his words away, scattering them across the graves like seeds. And somewhere, in the vast and beautiful darkness, the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter. The story of humanity had begun in caves and forests and small villages. It had grown to encompass cities and nations and worlds. It had stretched across the galaxy and beyond. But the best part of the story was not behind them. The best part was still ahead. It always was. That was what made it worth telling. And as the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged one by one, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see what would happen next. Whatever it was, it would be good. It would be strange and difficult and wonderful. It would be everything that the universe could be when beings chose to work together instead of apart. It would be home, not a place, not a planet, not a single point of light in the endless darkness. Home was wherever they carried each other, and they carried each other everywhere.